Endless Hustle is presented by Routine. Routine helps you unlock optimal health and daily performance by leveraging AI, in-home testing, and the latest in digital health tools to create a completely personalized micronutrient formula full of vitamins, minerals, and specialty compounds precisely dosed for your body based on your unique DNA, blood tests, and lifestyle habits. The process is simple, and thousands of members are choosing Routine and reporting results like more energy, better stress management, improved mental clarity, and more. Visit routine.co to join. All right, it's going to be an interesting day on the Endless Hustle. A lady I've known for many, many, many years. Karen, you're getting younger, I'm getting older. What's going on? But congratulations, families of the Mafia, MTV. You're back on TV, and you're profiling 5 families, 5 kind of Mafia-oriented families and what it's like, life after the Mafia. So tell me all about this.
Yes, I like to say from where we started with this series, from season 1 to now going into season 2, it's like we grew up. We really get like into the histories of the family. We dig deep. We added 2 new families to this season, the Nayfelds and the Catolos, which have huge history. There's so much background on their family. And we took the show kind of in a different direction than the typical reality show. This is more of like a docu-series to where it's following the history. We dig real deep into the history. And for me, this is my baby. Like my father is on it. He tells a lot more of his story, and my daughter is on it. It's definitely a multi-generational story on how basically we got from point A, which starts with my father, to point C, where it is with Karina, my daughter, and how we just continue to navigate through life.
So Karina is in finance now.
Yes.
And obviously she has a different last name than you, but when people hear that she's a Gravano and that her grandfather is Sammy the Bull, is that something she has to escape? What's the reaction? How does she handle it?
Karina's really, honestly, and I'm not just because she's my daughter, I'm extremely proud of her. She's a very strong, independent woman, and she's very adamant about building her own brand and her own identity, and she's doing a great job. People are always going to have an opinion. It's that old like judge a book by its cover. You kind of hear the last name and you want to think that you know someone's story. And Karina has definitely built her life in a totally different direction. And like I said, people know who she is because of the show, and she's my daughter, but she's also like, she's just a presence when she walks in the room, and I think that people really take to her and they want to understand her and know her for herself.
So one of my all-time favorites is Goodfellas. I've watched that movie like 1,000 times. As a young woman, you're growing up, you're Sammy the Bull's daughter. It's kind of the heyday of the 80s Mafia and the Gotti Mafia and Showbiz Mafia. Walk me through what it was like. If you were to really be able to encapsulate that era for the Mafia, what was it actually like experiencing that and being around that?
I like to always say it's like gangsters in that era were like Hollywood movie stars. Going into Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, it was, oh, that's Sammy's daughter. She doesn't have to pay a bill. Give them the best table. It was really like a lot like you see in the movies. A lot of glitz, glamour, jewelry, nice cars. But there was also the grounding of that lifestyle within the home. My father, I don't, people say the word mafia princess, and I guess in that era, I would have been considered that, being that my father was kind of like mob royalty back in that day and age, but he really kept me grounded. Like for my graduation gift, I got a florist, and it was basically like, yeah, you have this business, but this is work ethic. This is what you're gonna do. This is how you're gonna establish the rest of your life. And all those lessons that he taught me, I take with me today.
Do people around the neighborhood, like if you're dating a guy, does he know who your dad is as a kid? Like, is he like, I'm going to meet Sammy the Bull?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I probably lost out on a couple of dates back in the day because of that. But also, my father and other gangsters as well were kind of like looked up to like folk heroes. So like people wanted to be part of that lifestyle. And I had a boyfriend, but as soon as, we started dating, he immediately was taken under the wing and he had to go work construction. He had a job. I guess you could say dating me kind of came with a built-in job. So you had a direction. And my father made it very clear that he didn't want me to follow, or I'm a girl, so it's, I probably wouldn't have followed in his lifestyle, but he wanted different. He wanted better for us.
I also feel like once the Gotti family began to fall, that was kind of the end of Mafia's royalty and the Mafia as we knew it. Could you feel that happening as well when John goes away? Your dad obviously is gone. Could you feel that the actual glory days of the Mafia were beginning to fade at that point?
Yes, because I think there was so much light that was shed on like that particular trial, like my father and John Gotti. And it really kind of let you know that, here you are prior to this, you're seeing gangsters and the good days, but now these men are going to prison. So it kind of shed light and people started to realize that there is a dark side to this world. I do think that a lot of what kind of also brought down those days where there was a lot of attention put on Gotti. He kind of put the mob on Front Street, in my opinion, always being out there. And it kind of made a lot of people, uncomfortable from that world because there was so much attention drawn. It's a secret society. It wasn't supposed to be out there on Front Street like that. And once it was, I think a lot of people tried to tone it down, old timers and stuff like that. So
Mob Wives hits, which is when I met you, Renee, and the crew. And
right.
That show becomes a phenomenon. That's like VH1's #1 show. It's a whole new dynamic than anything we'd ever seen on television.
Yes.
When that hit for you, now that you can rewind the clock and look back, what was that period like for you guys as you're part of a hit show, but what you're essentially doing and part of, and now you're exposing this whole new world to this whole new audience? What was it like for you guys experiencing that?
Mob Wives kind of created the way. That show will always have memories for me. It was definitely a stepping stone to where I am now. When we kind of came, it was like, okay, now we're ready. Like, are we really doing this? We're out here. And I remember our first, I think it was our first press interview where we were asked about the mob. And I think all of us were in shock because we never spoke about it, right? Prior to this happening, it was like we never publicly spoke about it. So it was definitely a growth for all of us. Mob Wives was interesting. To say it was a lot of like the women's dynamic amongst each other, but where Families of the Mafia, in my opinion, takes it to a whole, it's like a totally different show because it's really highlighting the family. And we're, now I was just talking about my father and his history, but now on Families of the Mafia, I'm showing him and he's telling you about his history.
And he has a podcast, which mind-blowing. What an era we live in. Like, yes. Mafia gangster now has a podcast. That's crazy to me.
I was definitely a big supporter of him doing that because there are so many misconceptions out there about his story. Everybody took the narrative and wrote their version of what they believed happened with him and John Gotti and why he, walked away from the mob. And I always told him, right, wrong, or indifferent, I feel like you need to tell your story because it's extremely powerful and tell it in your voice. And my father, he is so into detail. Like he can remember, he has more memory than I do. And he's 70 something years old. Like he can remember what he was wearing, the smell of the room, because like he said, I was so entrenched in that world and it had such an impact on not only myself, but my family that I can remember everything detailed, where I went wrong, what I did right, and how, I just want to tell the story.
When he looks at all the incredible movies that have been made about the Mafia, obviously we have The Godfather, Goodfellas, and so many others. Is he a fan of those movies? Are there ones that that he loves or that he hates?
I think The Godfather for every mobster, I guess, would be kind of like the Bible, Godfather 1 and 2. Like my father said, when that came out, it was basically like watching his world on TV, So that would definitely be a movie that he is relatable to. The Sopranos, they're making a movie now, but definitely the series was very relatable. He likes Goodfellas as well.
Goodfellas was so over the top, and Scorsese made him so cartoonish, but it was also what made them so entertaining because they did feel like Hollywood movie stars. And Leota obviously says we were stars when we walked in the room.
And that's how I seen it. You know, growing up, it's like, it was so much like that. Like you walk into a restaurant, I remember the scene when they're walking in, they're moving the tables out and they're entering through the back. And, you know, I can remember that personally happening, going to places. So I think that definitely they hit on a lot of actual real life stuff.
I want to talk to you about prison reform because this is such a hot topic. And I know it's something that you are heavily involved in. The first time I personally became aware of it as someone who's a Philadelphia native was when Meek Mill and then Michael Rubin got involved to get him out of jail. And those two were able to bring it to essentially a national platform. And they created reform, and now Jay-Z's involved. But talk about prison reform. What are you doing? Where are we? What is the problem? Give me the whole 911 on this.
You know, I think it's such a climate within the court systems right now where the laws are basically changing. In the 80s and 90s, there were really harsh prison sentencing going on where people were, you know, especially people of color or, you know, Black and brown communities were hit hard with mass incarceration and the war on drugs. And a lot of those the sentences that were handed out were unfair. You know, people got life sentences like it was going out of style. And, you know, there's a lot of politicians and people that are pushing for change. That's why in 2018, there's a law that came in place, which is called the First Step Act. And the First Step Act kind of basically tries to lessen the prison sentencing. And it's still changing. The laws are continuing to change, but there are so many people now that had life sentences that would never seen the light of day that are now coming home. And for me, I have a loved one in prison that has a life sentence. And it's just, these people don't have a voice. It's like you're locked behind four walls and you're basically buried alive. And for me to be able to be his voice and be able to go out and do the things that need to be done, whether it's contact an attorney or be able to make copies or, you know, speak on his behalf is really what's important to me, because I do believe people change, and to just be sentenced to prison for the rest of your life for mistakes you made when you were a child is just unfair in my opinion. Like I said,
yeah, I was going to say your loved one is your boyfriend and he's serving a life. Yeah. How do you maintain that relationship? I'm like, I was trying to reconcile it.
You know, we did start off as really good friends. I met him back in the 90s, and obviously our lives went in two different directions. We maintained a relationship, but as the laws started to change and as I was personally working on things with my father and his case, and I started reading about drugs, like growing up, I only seen like organized crime and racketeering. But then when I started looking at his case and seeing that the laws are changing and there are people that are just like him or even have cases that are worse than him come home, I started really digging deep. And it's just unfair because yes, the laws are changing, but there are so many people that are left behind. So it's hard to say, like, you know, if you picture it like a door's opening and 10 people walk out and then bam, it's closed. And, you know, there's 100 more people left in there. And I'm just throwing those numbers out to make an example, but how do we just leave the ones that are in there, you know, in there?
So I want to ask you about Mafia moments. What was your greatest, and when I say greatest, not to make light of it, but your most Mafia moment when you were growing up that like is a scene out of Goodfellas that you got to experience?
Probably my Sweet 16. Like I always go back to that moment because I remember, well, first we had a videographer come in and they weren't allowed to shoot the whole back ends because, you know, we want no footage of who was really actually at my party. And like the most important mob figures were there at that time. And I remember I felt like most people were paying attention to the men in the back of the room than me, but it was also so much family around. And then it was just really exciting to open up all the envelopes and see what my gifts were. So that was like my biggest Mafia moment, because one thing about men in the mob, they know how to give good gifts.
So you would open it up and it's just rolls of hundreds pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Of course, my father took it all and put it into, which, you know, we opened a business later and stuff like that. But I wasn't able to just go on a wild shopping spree.
Does the Mafia even exist at this point? Is there a Mafia, or is it pretty much dismantled at the moment?
You know, I think there will always be a Mafia. You know, there's always something that will exist. How Is it like it was back then? No, because I think also the laws have changed, and there's cameras on every corner, and there's cell phones, and social media. So I think a lot of people are trying to gear more towards legitimate lifestyles. In my opinion, will there always be a mafia? Yes, but I think they're leaning to getting involved in legitimate businesses, because you see how much damage has been done to not only the individual that's involved in that world, but also the families.
You'd mentioned The Sopranos, my all-time favorite show. Obviously, the movie coming out, the Many Saints of Newark, the prequel. When The Sopranos came out, that was on television the first time that we had ever really seen those dynamics put forth. And obviously, Tony became television's first anti-hero. We see his love for his family, but meanwhile, he's sleeping around and killing people. Right. What was your feeling when you first saw The Sopranos? When you first experienced it, what were you thinking?
At the time that it came out, I was living in Arizona, so disconnected from that world, and just a whole different lifestyle out west, that it brought me back to my childhood. Like it was like on point. Like I felt like I was at Sunday dinner back in the 80s and 90s, sitting down watching the series. I definitely think that David Chase, when he was writing it, did an amazing job, because it kind of showed and highlighted the conflict of these men, where it's like you're a criminal outside the house and you're a gangster, and you have a certain way that you have to conduct yourself, in a certain I guess expectation that you have to live up to, but inside the house you're also a family man. So it kind of balanced that to show, in my opinion, what a lot of men connected to that lifestyle must have had to go through mentally. I mean, I don't know if we're like counting ducks and stuff like that, but there's definitely, I think, where you have to cut it off. It's like you're home and then you're outside. And I think, like, bringing it back to my family, my father did a great job of that, because we had a horse farm growing up that I remember a lot of the men that were his crew, and I considered them uncles, but to him that was his crew. They would come up there, and I didn't see mob activity, I seen family fun. Then they head back to Brooklyn, and it's all about business as usual.
So what was the common thread amongst the five families? As you do Families of the Mafia and you're meeting these five families, you're bringing in all these new people, what were some of the common threads amongst those families that they experienced that you may have experienced?
I think they're all connected to the lifestyle, whether it's the Russian mob or the Irish mob, and they all kind of have that in the shadows of my father feel. Right. So it's like we sometimes grow up in a world that our parents think they're sheltering us from, especially I could speak like for the second generation, which would be me and, like some of the other fathers now or mothers in the show. It's like we seen the glory days, right? So it's like you have this, something's wrong, but you really don't question it, because, these are our parents. We love them. We idolize them. But also, like, for me to ever really question what my father was doing at that particular time, I didn't, because like I said, we'd walk into restaurants and he was, "Hey, Sammy, how you doing? You need anything?" We'd walk down the block and there could be like the old lady grandmother, and it's like, "Oh, hey, Sammy." And, so it was a respect from the community. So I never felt like he was doing something so bad that he was, respected by all these people. But then it goes into the next generation, which are our kids, right? And so we're like the middle generation. My father's the first. And it's like how they are affected, because my daughter, I can speak on her. She grew up visiting her grandfather in prison and seeing, like, I call it the dark side of that lifestyle, where a loved one is taken away. So I think the common thread is you'll see that with every family. There's also, because of people's decisions, there's repercussions that people have to deal with. And either you could take that as something bad, or you can take that as it's a lesson. And I think that all of us are trying to teach, whether it's our own families or people just watching the show, that there's a lesson in doing wrong, because you learn from it and hopefully you try to be better.
So you'd mentioned obviously Arizona, and that was witness protection, correct?
No, well, not for me. Or my father, actually, when he was in prison after he cooperated, he had to go for 6 years, and then the government really wanted him to go into witness protection, and he went to Colorado. he signed himself out after 6 months. He didn't like some of the, conditions, and basically because my family, my mother, brother, and I didn't choose to go in the witness protection program with him, then, we weren't supposed to visit him. There's a lot of rules and regulations once you're in witness protection. So he signed himself out and came to Arizona. Now we do have another family, which are the Catolos, and they actually did go into the witness protection program. They have a big story. Their father is Wild Bill. And I didn't really know them personally growing up back in the day. I knew of the father. I knew that, he was the underboss of the Colombo crime family, and he has a pretty big story. So their son, his son, Bill, which is on the show, did go into the witness protection program. And I think that we do kind of highlight a lot of that on the show, on what his experiences are.
There's a great scene at the end of Goodfellas where Liotta's character, when he's obviously playing Henry Hill, he talks about, I'm just an average schmo eating bad spaghetti wherever he is at that point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you were in talking to your father and obviously the other families, as they were now distanced from the mafia and they're now in witness protection, did they experience some of the same elements where it's like, we're not superstars anymore, we're not somebodies, we're now kind of distance? Did they experience similar to what Henry Hill and Liotta experienced?
Yes, I think there's different levels of it. Like my father, he was a boss. You know what I mean? If he wanted something done, he had 15 to 20 people that would do it at the drop of a dime. So yes, coming to the realization now that you come out and you have a different type of lifestyle, it probably, it's different. It takes adjustment. My father is just still who he is to this day. So he's still a boss and he commands things. So instead of him going to some guy on the street, it's like, I need this now. And I'm the person he calls. But it's a good thing. I think that it definitely has to be a lifestyle adjustment. And I think just looking at my father in general, the way he is in business, and he's aggressive and he wants to be able to, he's very fair also. So it's like when he's aggressive with something, he has that mentality, like we're in the, like with me, for instance, like, oh, we're going to do this. Give me a piece, move this. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's just a cosmetic company. I'm going to do this myself. You know what I mean? It's just like that mentality will never go away. You just have to learn how to, I guess, adjust to it being more in the legitimate world and, with different people around you now.
What were those conversations with Karina like when she was growing up? Because you obviously experienced it firsthand. She didn't necessarily experience that lifestyle. As she's growing up and she's now like able to form her way of thinking as a child, and she's now understanding who her family, who her grandfather was. What were those conversations like?
I always kept Karina shielded from that. She lived out west where there's not a big mob presence out there. So she never had to deal with it face to face. I did sit her down and I basically let her know everything, not only that my father has been through, but that I've been through. I got arrested, her dad went to jail, and this is wrong. She went to visit her father, but this isn't something that, even though it was regular to her because my brother was in prison, my father was in prison, her father was in prison. This isn't something that I want for you. I don't want you to get married and be with someone in prison. I want you to do better and realize our mistakes. And not saying the people are in prison are bad. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, they're human beings, but you still want better for your child, right? You want her to use your lessons to be better. So it was those conversations that were happening. When I did make the decision to move her from Arizona to New York, I had to sit her down and say, listen, grandpa's legacy is huge. Everybody's going to know who your grandfather is in Staten Island, in the communities that we I grew up in, and that you're going to grow up in. So you have to be able to have thick skin. People may have a bad opinion. People may have a good opinion. The reality is people shouldn't be able to affect you and judge you off of who he is. So always keep sight on where you want to be. And I think she did a great job. She says it like over the top to me sometimes, like, I'm my own person. I'm like, I know. And then, I become the overbearing mother to where I'm always telling her, this could happen. She's like, Mom, I don't do that. But I want her to know, like, this is a reality. And because of your last name, sometimes, or because of my last name and who you're related to, sometimes things could be blown bigger and way out of proportion than they really are. So know that.
What about the boys dating her when they find out? What's that like?
I know, right? I know. Karina, she's beautiful. She's definitely very sought after. Like there's a lot of guys that want to talk to her, but you know, it's always a thing. They have to make sure they treat her right. Her mom is probably worse me than her grandfather would be. He's more rational. So, but she has a good head on her shoulders, Karina. So I'm pretty sure that she'll be able to finally be with someone or be with someone eventually that will make sure that he treats her like the princess she is.
We're at a point now where obviously this period of time, especially 80s Mafia, is examined everywhere. You see docuseries, you see documentaries, Netflix, wherever. When you see some of this shit, is it wild to you to be like, I live this and now this is a piece of history. This is a piece that millions of people are experiencing, but I got to live it.
Yes. I always say like that's a world I grew up in, yet knew so little about. So I actually learned from the outside looking in sometimes, especially when like my father got arrested in the 90s. It was like everything started to unfold. And I was, you know, we never sat down and had conversations about it at the kitchen table. So I was watching it on the news, like, wait, what happened? Like, you know, and now sitting like, so it was kind of like I was freaked out. Then I think I was angry, I was confused. It was all different emotions. And now like sitting back, I'm finally at a place where I'm pretty much comfortable in my own skin and everything that happened and where we are as a family. And to watch my father especially talk about it, you know, he's very straight to the point. Like he's gonna say it, and sometimes like he says things that you're like, okay, but he's real, right? So I think that's what's really important, is to be able to tell this story as real as it is. And yeah, to know that I was part of, attached to something, I really wasn't part of it, that will go on forever, years and years and years after I'm not even here anymore. This will be etched in history.
Do you have vivid recollections of John Gotti and interactions? Was he as a big a character and as just over the top as portrayed and as we've seen through different television and docuseries and anything else done on him?
Yes, I always say John is definitely someone that will walk in a room, or at the time would walk in a room and command attention. He conducted himself in a way that you knew he was a mob boss. The way he carried himself, his mannerisms, like who he would talk to. He was an interesting character, and not to take away from who he was as an individual, because, you know, my father and his history, you know, especially now that my father's telling the story the way it is, there's two sides to the story. But I will say this about John, like when he walked in a room, he definitely commanded attention.
You're now a female producer in a world where we're seeing so many incredible female producers getting to be a producer behind the scenes. And you've done so much now with Viacom, MTV, VH1. What do you think about producing, the production world, and getting to make these types of series?
I think it's amazing. You know, I've definitely had nothing but great experiences with Viacom. They, for me, are like a network that's willing to push the edge, especially going on MTV with this true crime series is something that's never been seen before. Every producer that's on this show, like we worked with from my prior reality show now to here, and we basically were like, what's the next step in television? And they just do such an amazing job. Like they're willing to push the envelopes to really get in there and show the true story. And for us to be able, as talent, to be able to tell the story as authentic as we can. And like, I personally haven't seen anything like we've done in this series on TV. It's just like a cross between reality and documentary, and the way it's almost like I was just watching a cut of it. And I'm like, this is kind of like a scripted television show in a sense, because it's really following the story. Like you're watching, you can't wait until the next episode. And it's more storytelling than, you know, the average arguing or bickering or not seeing eye to eye. I believe that this series is more telling a story. It's a storytelling show.
Congratulations, Karen. I always love anything Mafia, I'm in, and anything that talks about Gotti, the 80s. I grew up in that era. I remember it vividly. And then seeing the essentially the collapse because of, you know, obviously RICO and everything that the feds were able to put into place to essentially dismantle the Mafia. That was good or bad and everything that was happening, but that was really a glory period that is unlike anything anyone will probably ever see. So I'm always fascinated by shows like this. So congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you for always supporting through the years. You
Yeah,
definitely.
I was just saying, we've known each other a long time. So congratulations. And I hope everybody watches Families of the Mafia on MTV.
Yes. Thursday nights, 9 p.m.
You got it. Thanks so much, Karen. Great seeing you.
Thank you. Great seeing you.
Take care.
Bye.